Okay, welcome everyone. This is the SIG CLI meeting for August 30. So that's it. Let's go ahead and get started. Status updates. Anyone would like to speak about it? Okay, I'll go ahead. I'll get started actually. So I have some status updates in regarding to CLI plugins. So as I mentioned a couple meetings ago, we are officially alpha with plugins for the 1.8 release, which means not necessarily there are many new features coming in the 1.8 release. Actually, I think most of what we had as an alpha release was already in the 1.7 release. However, we are going to be officially alpha, which means there will be some documentation around plugins and things like that. So that's something people have been asking for quite some time already. Some docs, and I'm working on those right now. I'm actually almost done with a proposal. I'm hopefully going to send up a request for the documentation section today. When I was working on docs for plugins, I realized that we don't have many docs for kubectl on the documentation website. So that's something I wanted to shout here. So if you guys are feeling excited about writing a lot of docs for kubectl other than the ones we generate automatically, so that's something we are kind of in the need of. So there are not many for kubectl. But anyway, for plugins, I'm almost done and hopefully going to open up a request later today. And then we will have some documentation about the underlying plugin structure. But that's it. That was it for me in terms of status updates. So other than that, a lot of code reviews as always. I have at the moment a good amount of open tabs on my browser that I can't even see five icons. So that's stuff waiting for getting some reviews. So I'm also doing a lot of those recently. That's it for me in terms of status.
I had a question on the plugins. Like, one thing I think that's really interesting to me about the plugins is the distribution piece, because without that, it's like downloading the binary and stuff is not. You could run them individually, right? If you download the binary.
Yeah.
Do we have any plans to? Is that like on the roadmap or anything like that?
Yeah, it is on the roadmap. However, we don't have a deadline for that yet. You mean a way for distributing the plugins and things like that?
Yeah, I mean, I think I'm thinking a couple different things are possibilities, but like one thing I can think of is if you have a CRD or if your plugins are tied to manipulating certain resources, for instance, like you introduced a CRD for a new resource type, and now you want new kubectl commands to manipulate that resource. Like we could, at least in the CRD, like add an annotation that links to what the plugin is, right, and allow just kubectl to install it off of that. I'm not thinking like some massive repository or something like that. With that.
Yeah, we have that in the plans. However, we don't have a deadline for those. Currently, to install plugins, it's basically, it depends on how the plugins are distributed. But if you get, like, for example, a targz package, you would extract those under your kube-config directory, the plugin subdirectory under your kube-config directory. But there is nothing really automated at the moment for something like that. Plugins, that's something I'm writing in details in the documentation. Plugins has 3 places where it searches for the actual plugins. So other than under your kubeconfig directory, you can also install plugins following the XDG directory structure. So in places like USR, share, or and some of those default places. So that means the package manager of your operating system could be installing plugins in one of those default places, and the plugins framework would be able to detect them.
I see.
But specifically for plugins, we don't have anything yet. You have to basically manually download and extract those.
That makes sense, though. I think what you're saying is something I hadn't thought about or I'd forgotten about. The like you could do apt-get or something like that, and then it would install a bunch of plugins.
Yeah, exactly. You could have them packaged, the way your operating system expect them, or even things like Brew or I don't know, other package managers. So it's not only under your home directory. It can be installed in some places on your operating system, and plugins will be able to detect those. But anyway, I'll write that in details, and eventually, for people that distribute plugins, will have some options about how to deliver them, other than just having to download them and extract the package. But anyway, yeah, it would be really nice to be able to do something like kubectl plugin install list, things like that. But it is in the original proposal, but we don't have any deadline or even a specific proposal for that yet.
As always, staffing is a challenge.
Anyways, other status updates, things people are really angry about and feeling a lot of pain about in regarding to kubectl.
I just had 2 things here. One is Antoine on the call? Antoine's been working on the caching piece, so he integrated like HTTP caching into the OpenAPI stuff. So like for those of you who aren't aware, for discovery service and caching certain metadata about the server, we had our own solution of like writing the files manually to temp directories in the user's home directory, and then didn't really have a good expiration mechanism for that when the APIs changed and when plugins or when extensions are installed and that sort of thing. And so Antoine introduced an HTTP caching layer that uses e-tags, so we get cache invalidation and we don't have to maintain a bunch of code to write temporary files and read temporary files and that sort of thing. And he'll be using it for the OpenAPI validation. So he wrote, Antoine also is changing the validation from Swagger to OpenAPI, and this has a couple of benefits. One is the Swagger is being deprecated and not supported anymore, so that's going to be gone. So we had to switch over. It also, the OpenAPI will aggregate extensions. So when you have extension API servers installed, it can actually validate their schema as well. It happens to be a lot faster. I think he got about a 10x performance speed up, which is just nice. And it's a lot cleaner now. The old validation code had evolved organically and had to work through things like multiple API groups existing but not having all that data in one place, and so the code actually got pretty complicated as it tried to switch back and forth between API groups. And so the OpenAPI spec one allows us to do things in a much more clean, simple way, and having the hindsight of looking at how the code evolved over time, we're able to rewrite it, accommodating all the requirements up front in a clean way. And then the other piece, I thought I'd just add a small thing on here, looking at what we were able to do with the validation and how much that was able to impact the structure of the code. I started just prototyping what it would look like to rewrite apply from scratch, knowing now that we're going to have multiple merge strategies, and we're going to want to be able to evolve those merge strategies over time and add new ones. That we're going to add new patch directives over time, and that we should be able to simply drop in new patch directives for particular patch operations without updating dozens of functions and multiple files or many files and that sort of thing. And so I'll probably next week just push out a example of what that might look like, but it does a couple things, structural changes. So one thing it does is instead of doing two-way diffs, which is a clever idea and kind of a nice algorithm thing, the two-way diffs made it really hard to evolve the structure because there were many arguments that had to be threaded through the entire piece about, are you just doing adds, are you just doing deletions? And so when a given function would do very different things based on the context in which it was executed, like the end result and intent of the function was very different. So when you look at it, it's hard to figure out how to modify it because you didn't understand all the ways it was being used. So one thing it does is it just does one three-way diff as one structural change I'm proposing. And then another structural change I'm proposing is breaking it up into multiple sub-components that do separate things. So like the patch generation itself into directives in JSON would be abstracted away from the actual creation of the diff, right? And the diff would just say add this element or delete this element, and the patching code itself would figure out what directives needed to be added as a part of that, instead of the diff code figuring out what directives. And then another thing it separates out is the generation of the tree. So the current code has the diff code also traverse the tree, but because it's walking 3 trees at once, it's somewhat challenging, or because it's walking 2 trees together 2 times and then combining the results of 2 tree walks into a third tree thing. That makes it really hard, and it would be really nice if we just had up front a tree structure that had all 3 elements from the recorded, the current local, and then the remote. And so we just look at 3 elements and then decide what diff operation we need to take based on the values of those elements and what the merge strategy is. And so both of these, it'll be using the visitor pattern pretty heavily to be able to independently add element types like lists or maps or primitive items, as well as independently add merge strategies for each one of those types. So being able to say, okay, replace versus merge versus just replace the keys versus other thing.
Okay, is that something, would it make sense to expose that to the user through flags maybe? For example, you could choose the merge strategy using a flag or something like that, or it's directly attached to the underlying type, something like that?
Well, one thing I definitely want to do is have the merge strategy be sent to the server. So I want the server to be able to take a patch and merge it without looking at any other server state, right? Because one problem we're having is when the server has a way it wants to merge something and then realize that's not the correct way of merging that, there's this weird bug caused by merging it in that way, the patch requests, how to merge that it needs to be agreed upon by the client and the server.
Okay.
And so when they don't communicate that between them, we can never change it because they have to agree upon it and they don't communicate it. And so I want the server one to communicate its patch semantics to the client. And that works for apply, but as Jordan and some people from API Machinery raised, like not all patch clients use apply and look at that metadata, and some patch clients want just a stable patch interface.
Right.
And so the client actually has to send it back to the server. So even though the server tells the client it thinks it should create the patch, the client needs to send it back to the server. I paid attention to what you said, or I just totally ignored what you said.
Mm-hmm.
Here's how to apply the patch. Yeah, and Fabiano, to get directly to answer your question, I think the flags might be interesting. I'm not sure for apply if it makes sense to supply flags, maybe like annotations on the objects themselves. But I do think we want apply to be fully declarative.
Mm-hmm.
So it should be like totally reproducible no matter who runs it. But I do think like the patch command definitely makes sense to have flags.
I'm thinking, I think one of those are definitely very welcome very welcomed improvements, and definitely very needed, because I think one of the big issues with apply today is that it's not really predictable, right? You submit it and you don't know, you expect something to happen, but you don't know exactly what's the outcome of, and that kind of makes it really predictable. You know exactly what's going to happen. And I definitely don't want to expose too much of the underlying system to the end user, like we do with generators, for example. So I'm not sure if that's really good, but it would be an option, to be able to choose, because if you're doing a apply, you're already doing some really, underlying complicated stuff. So anyway, it could make sense, but I'm happy. I'm a lot happy already with just fixing the issue and not introducing any new stuff.
Yeah, no, that's a really, that's helpful feedback. As I try and write through a prototype,
Mm-hmm.
I'll keep in mind that we may want to allow the user to override the
Mm-hmm.
patch semantics supplied by the server.
Yeah. Did you tell Joe Beda about it already? He's probably
I have not. I know he has opinions about
yeah.
apply. I think it's not directly contradictory to how he wants things done, but I don't think it's either exactly what he specifically was looking for.
Yeah.
But I think it's better. So
yeah, he will definitely welcome improvements anyway.
So yeah, my plan for that is I want to be able to write the prototype and flesh it out and just give something that like has the structure that we can then, that maybe is not fully feature complete and we can't necessarily swap out immediately, but has enough structure there that individual contributors from the community potentially could pick up, putting the flesh on the bones of different pieces.
Okay, nice.
All right, that's all I got for status. Oh, topics. So yeah, one thing we talked about, Fabiano, I think a couple weeks back, we had 2 tests that were broken for SIG CLI tests and were broken for like weeks. And in both cases, we knew about, one, it took us a little while to figure out they were broken. Not horrible. It took us longer than it should have. I think it took us probably a week to figure out they were broken. And then after we figured it out, it took us like weeks and to get them resolved. And one of them still isn't resolved. And Fabiano put a fix in, but we still trying to get it merged to the other tests being broken. So it's pretty hard. But one thing I think that came out of it that I saw was, in both cases, the folks who approved the PRs didn't actually, once they were notified about the fix, they didn't actually fix them. And they didn't, they weren't the ones who followed up and saw that the tests were broken. So this actually makes it really hard when we have the project maintainers are not the same people who are approving the PRs. Makes it really hard to maintain the state, and we don't actually have a build cop rotation either. So I think what we need is, one, we need kind of a build cop rotation of folks who are looking at the test regularly. So it's not just like in one case, another team notified us about a test being broken. In another case, someone from SIG CLI saw that it was broken, but after about a week. It'd be nice if we just had one person who looked every day, just did all the tests, and most of the time they are green. So if we could just keep that up, it would be really helpful. And then within a day, we could take action. And then it would be nice if we had an SLO. Like one problem that came up is we were a little bit hesitant to roll back the PRs that broke the things. And part of that was because the PRs had been in for a week. And part of it was because we just didn't have clear guidelines, like to say something to point to set expectations, like to the PR authors. If you break a test, like we want to be able to set expectations, say we're going to roll back your PR if it's not fixed within X hours, right? So having an SLO would be very helpful, that we could publish and just say we're going to roll back PRs. And then lastly, for the build cop rotation, I think it makes sense to have the folks who are responsible for approving code and looking at to make sure that the contributions make sense also be the folks that are going to help look at and make sure things continue to pass, right? Having those two out of sync, I think makes it hard for maintainers.
Yeah, specifically about this failure, yeah, one thing I have some trouble dealing with is that, you know, when it was a failure related to a skill test, right? And that's something that does not run on pull requests. So you developed something, you open the pull request tests pass, and after it got merged, 1 week later we figure out it was broken, you know, for skill tests specifically, 1.7 against a 1.8 cluster, or the opposite, I'm not sure. But anyway, yeah, and the test dashboard is not something I personally keep an eye, you know, on a daily basis. So that's something definitely we have to fix. I'm not sure yet. It could make even sense maybe to have a mechanism, something, I'm not sure if we have that already, that notifies people through email automatically, and we take, for example, the list of approvers for kubectl stuff, and we do something like a on-call week rotation for the people that gets, you know, notified about the test failure, so that I would see, you know, if I'm on call this week, I would receive an email about the failure, and I would be in charge of, you know, speaking to the people that, you know, generated the problem, and eventually, you know, reverting the commit or something like that. Anyway, but definitely, that's definitely something that we have to fix, because in this case specifically, I think we lost like a couple weeks, right, until having a fix, and the actual fix is not even merged yet. It's it's in the merge queue right now, right?
It's sitting there,
Yeah.
ready to go.
Yeah, we're just waiting for the robot to get it merged. But anyway, that's something we have to have fixed. And I'm not sure if other SIG CLI, if other SIG teams have something similar. But for us specifically, it's a big issue because we have this skill problem, right? So test that does not run on pull requests, but can fail later.
Yeah, we actually have a number of tests like that. So for instance, the GKE tests were broken, which don't run on pull requests. And what's interesting is they were broken in a way that was not specific to GKE. It was just, if you say like GCE tests like a specific environment, a set of different things, and then GKE tests a different set of things, some of which are specific to GKE, and some are just open source but slightly different configuration. What we ended up triggering was something that was open source but a slightly different configuration. And so that's another one, right, where we should probably be looking at it.
Yeah, I would like also to bring something somehow related to that, not tests specifically, but this kind of tasks that we have to do from time to time, and I don't think we are doing right now. It's related to checking our dependencies in terms of things that we need to update or not yet update. So I don't think anyone today is doing the job of checking, for example, Cobra and PFlag from time to time for important bug fixes that would help us and rebase the newer versions of those dependencies. So Cobra and PFlag is just one example, but we recently had an issue related to the JSON or YAML parser. That's something Juan has been working on. So I bet we probably have a number of dependencies that are directly related to kubectl, like Cobra and PFlag are, and we are probably very much behind, the latest stable releases of them. On the other hand, I know that the next time we do Cobra rebase, for example, Cobra recently changed how it actually, I'm sorry, I think that's PFlag. So PFlag recently changed the way it prints the flags. So that's going to change our help. They are now doing some, tabulated output of flags. So that's something that will actually help us, because the way we display flags in our help, especially if you have a good number of flags in a given command, it's not very good, so they're now doing like tabulated output of flags. But I know when we get to rebase that, it will break a couple minor things that we will have to fix. So that's something else. I try to do that from time to time, but currently we don't have a defined process of checking our dependencies and pulling, bug fixes from them from time to time. So basically, we do that when we figure out, some new issue that is related to a given dependency. Then we will rebase, a next version to fix that. But we don't have a specific, process for checking them from time to time. So that's something we could also think about, maybe to take, SIG CLI team members from to time check our dependencies and see if there are anything that is interesting for us, and do the rebases against newer versions. But anyway, not sure yet how to fix that, but something that should be in our agenda.
Go vendoring in depths is probably the hardest thing I've ever had to do in my professional career. I cannot wrap my head around.
Yeah, and you work on Kubernetes. I work on OpenShift. It's even harder in OpenShift because Kubernetes is one of our dependencies, right?
Oh yeah.
And we have a lot more. But yeah, definitely that's very hard. But anyway, it's something that we have to think about.
Yeah, I agree. We should come up with some like trophy for whoever takes that on.
Yeah. Usually it ends up, you having to do that manually. So most of times you can rely on the godep command line, command. But so yeah. Okay. What else?
Okay.
Anything else?
Hello.
Hi.
Can you guys hear me?
Yes.
Hi, Philip. Okay. I've been working on a smart PR which fix hard-coded resources strings. So previously, when user execute kube control help message, it will prompt what kind of valid resources they can use, but it's hard-coded, and it can change dynamically. So my PR will use the discovery client to fetch those information from API server and filter some useless sub-resources and sort it in alphabet order and prompt like previously. After that, like when a new developer adds some new resources to server, they don't need to add those hard-coded things to the kube control. Also, during the fetching information procedure, if the transmission got some problem like networking issue or cluster down, kube control will fall back to the previously hard-coded but legacy API resources. And there's only one blemish I've come up with is some little latency problem. So previously, when user execute kube control get help message, it will cost like 0.2 or 3 seconds to prompt that whole bunch of messages. But when we're switching to use the discovery client, the first time invocation, it may cost like 1 second. So the detailed information I will paste in the PR in the documentation, and it's still work in progress. If you guys want to take a look at that detailed implementation, help yourself. Okay, only one small PR. Thank you.
Great, that sounds like a good idea. Discovery versus Open API, how'd you choose one versus the other?
Sorry?
Like there's the Open API and then there's the discovery stuff. I was just wondering if.
Oh, you mean that discovery client and that kind of cache will be deprecated?
No, no, it won't be deprecated. I don't think. I just.
You mean Open API have a better choice, to fetch those API resources? You will have.
Yeah, I'm not sure. It might not be better. It might be worse. I don't know.
Yeah,
I'm just wondering if you even looked at it.
Yeah, I will take a look to take a look at that Open API cache something. Okay.
Because the discovery client for 1.8 is still going to be cached using the old mechanism, which means it won't refresh.
10 minutes?
It has like a 10-minute refresh. So if you install an extension API server and then kube control, it's not going to appear there for like 10 minutes, which isn't the end of the world. It doesn't happen that much, but it would be nice if we could fix that, because I imagine a common workflow is I'm going to install the extension API server and then check to see that I can actually use it, right?
Okay.
But don't do a lot of work to switch it out, because I think we're going to end up switching the discovery service cache.
Okay. So if you guys have some, opinion or comments, I will paste the PR. You can leave the message. I will check those messages. Okay.
Thank you.
Awesome. Okay. Sorry, I missed that. Is that for the OC get without any flags or?
Kube control get.
I'm sorry. Kube control get. Yeah.
When you tap kube control get /h or help, it will prompt the API resources you have, like posts, nodes, some RC, some. It will prompt like a list, but it's a hard-coded resources. There's a constant string named valid resources, I think, in our code base, and I think that can be changed to dynamically fetch from server.
Yeah.
Using discovery client. I think it's only a small change. Maybe we can use the discovery client first. If there has a better option, I can migrate to use a better option like Open API or something.
Yeah. That sounds really interesting. The only concern I have is that I think it's the first time that any help in our set of commands is dynamic, right? Because help today, it is really hard-coded, everything in relation to help. So there are a few minor details that I would check to make sure. First is that we only do that request when you actually call the help for get, because help is built, every time you run the help for any command, the entire help for all commands are built at that time. So I will need to make sure that you only do the API call if you call the get help specifically. That can't happen if you try to, if you want, for example, the main kubectl help. So we need to make sure you don't do the API calling in those cases, help or any other command. And I would suggest that you also take a look at how that plays with any kind of generated docs or anything we generate automatically from our help content, right? Because I think we have some documentation or some things that are generated automatically based on our help. So need to check how having a dynamic help would play with those. But anyway, just a couple concerns, because I think it's the first time that anything in help is dynamic. And I know we had reasons in past to try to avoid that. I think that specifically is a good reason for having them. However, we just need to check, those corner cases and make sure it doesn't break anything else, right? Because for example, if my cluster is down, I don't want to break help for kubectl, right? I want to still be able to show help if the cluster I'm currently pointing at is down. So I don't want to see an error. I still want to see help. So
yeah, if the cluster is down, it will fall back to some previously hard-coded version or something else. We can have a discussion, and I will check the detail if there's only, related to the help messages, some generated manuals related to those hard-coded resources. I will have a check.
Okay, nice. Yeah, just a couple concerns, but I really didn't look at the pull request yet. So yeah, I'll make sure I do that.
That's a really good point, Fabian. Like, two things I think that made me think of. One is, like, we generate help documentation that we then post to our reference doc page, and that's like needs to be statically generated because there's no cluster behind it. So it may be that the help thing we generate we should be able to disable that piece of it, for instance. And then that makes sense. Like, I think even if your cluster is down, you should be able to say like help -- local, or I don't know what it is, but something like that. And we may want to fall back if we are unable to talk to the cluster, for instance. It may be that we want to fall back on some canned help message.
Yeah, exactly. Just if you can access the cluster, you either fall back to a hard-coded list. However, we probably want to get rid of those hard-coded lists because even though we fix the issue by doing it dynamically, we'll still have that in our code base, and it still have to be maintained, right? So we probably want to get rid of the hard-coded list at some point. So I would say, for example, if you can't access the cluster, display a message like, I don't know, run OC-get without flags or arguments to see the list of resources or something like that.
Actually, one thought is with OpenAPI, we actually statically compile that for the server, or it's available in the repo, for instance. And we've been talking about compiling in a binary version of the OpenAPI for a vanilla cluster and a kube control, so that like it's just there, and by default you send that as one of the tags you have, and it can fall back on that. And if we did something like that and used OpenAPI for the help messages, we could try and hit the cluster, and then if we aren't able to, we can fall back on the OpenAPI that's compiled in, and then it's not a static list. It will still change with each release.
Yeah, absolutely. That sounds like a good solution.
But probably not for version 1 because it's not compiled in yet, and
Sure.
you already have the discovery service stuff.
Yeah, we still have to take care about, you know, skill stuff probably, because you will have, you know, a hard-coded, sorry, not hard-coded, but a binary version of the resources that is directly tied to a server version. But yeah, anyways, sounds like a solution.
Cool.
So I have a quick update on the kube control apply and using OpenAPI. So it's under review and hopefully will be merged before code freeze.
Sweet. That'll be exciting. That will really help with the Q stuff.
Yes.
And that's a hard area of code to work with. So thanks, Munshi. That's going to be a big help, and probably good groundwork to show all the other uses for OpenAPI as we for instance generating the help messages. Right, can look at how you use OpenAPI a little bit. It's a little bit different use case, but we can look at it as an example of how we dynamically build things around OpenAPI.
Yes.
I have. Oh, go ahead.
No, go ahead.
I was going to say, so I have an update regarding. So I opened up a proposal for basically normalizing sort of the types of options we pass to commands. This was based on a comment by Fabiano on a particular PR a while back. But basically, I posted the link to the proposal, and the gist of it is we would have maybe two separate structs that each command would receive, and this would allow us to, so in the future, expand essentially as the need arises, sort of new runtime options and tweaks that commands can use to see how it should run. So in particular, this could potentially tie back to the PR that uses the discovery client, for example, to fetch all of the resources that are listed as part of OC-get help, such that if you're doing a command other than OC-get help, we're not dynamically fetching that entire list every time for every other command, but rather maybe we could pass a flag that specifically tells OC-get not to fetch the list, and that way every other command won't be dependent on the time it takes to fetch that list from the server. So obviously right now the names of the options are not really set in stone. So but they provide sort of a basic gist of so maybe we'd have like a command runtime set of options which would contain everything the command needs to run and print output, and then command attributes or maybe another name that would receive things such as a base name. And so right now this is particularly something we run into downstream, where so a bunch of commands for us, we would like to have OC instead of kubectl as the parent, maybe in help or in certain error outputs. But it's not really straightforward to do so. So sometimes we end up passing as an extraneous option to new command XYZ. We end up passing essentially just maybe like a parent name string argument. So this would solve this by essentially allowing us to have a custom signature, a function signature for every single command, and allow maybe downstream projects, for example, to tweak options, and maybe even other parts of the code base to tweak options.
Yeah, I think that's a nice move in the direction of having our own interface for declaring commands. I mean, an interface that would make sure that every command has the complete validate run pattern, for example. I don't think we are at that point yet of having the interface. However, you know, having at least a default way of declaring that ties to a given signature of a given function is already a step in that direction. Especially because today, you know, like we talked about, the string cube CTL is hard-coded in many places, and we would like to make that parameterizable. And also, like, many commands don't take the in reader and the out and error out writers. So we want to make sure that, you know, every command takes that and uses that right into the output. So yeah, I think it's a first step in that direction, and we'll already improve things a little bit in terms of having a default pattern, you know, for declaring commands. Okay, we're almost on time. Any other topics, guys?
Oh, I still have a question. I mean made some you know, couple of my PR just got some Bazel build field issues, which I think may relate it to isolate kube control into an independent repo. So anyone who has the knowledge of how to fix that, I would be really appreciated if you could tell me how to do that. I'm really not, you know, have that knowledge about the Bazel kind of things. So I would be really appreciated if someone could help me. Thank you.
Yeah, just send the link, and yeah, I don't have the knowledge.
I don't know anyone was have been working on those you know, in isolate kube control. Maybe Meng Qiyu, are you working on these things?
Yeah.
Yeah, I was working on that, but recently I haven't touched that. But I have some experience with Bazel. I suspect maybe because it uses a different path for the Bazel, so I guess maybe you have some dependency for the test data, and you must include in the Bazel build file to make it work.
Okay, so it's like I have to edit those in the dependency manually. It's we can't using the hack generate Bazel to automatically generate those dependency right now.
If you depend something other than the Go source code, then you will need to edit manually. But if you just only depend on Go source code, it should be fine, I guess.
Okay, I will send you my PR and we can talk later.
Sure.
Okay, thank you.
No problem.
Can I ask a quick question? Was there some reason why so much of Kube CTL is excluded from linting?
I'm not sure. I don't remember a discussion like that in the past.
Cool, I'll go ahead and fix it up then.
Yeah, nice. Okay, guys, I think that's it then. Thanks, everyone. Great meeting. And we talk again in a couple of weeks. Okay. Thank you. Bye.
Thanks, fellas.
Thank you.